Part 1. The Overture, Sowing the Seeds of Mystery. The flickering candle casts long, dancing shadows across ancient scrolls, illuminating words whispered across millennia. In the quiet hush of these sacred texts, we often encounter figures whose lives burn with an intensity that defies simple understanding. Among them stands a giant, not merely in stature, but in the paradoxes he embodies. Samson, a man chosen before birth, consecrated by divine decree, yet whose every step seems to tread a perilous path between the miraculous and the mundane, between sacred duty and earthly desire. How could a man gifted with such unparalleled strength, a direct instrument of God's will, fall prey to such profound vulnerability? How could the champion of Israel become entangled in a web of deceit, spun by a woman whose loyalties lay with his enemies? Tonight, by the gentle glow of candlelight, we embark on a journey into the heart of one of the Old Testament's most enigmatic narratives. We will peel back the layers of Samson's story, not just to recount his legendary feats, but to uncover the profound theological truths hidden within his strength, the bitter lessons of his betrayals, and the searing, complex nature of his tragic redemption. Join us as we explore the life of a Nazirite whose story echoes with the eternal struggle between divine calling and human frailty. Part 2. The Deep Dive, a journey of discovery. To truly grasp the tumultuous life of Samson, we must first immerse ourselves in the historical and cultural landscape of his era. He emerged during the period of the Judges, a turbulent epoch in Israel's history, roughly spanning from the conquest of Canaan to the establishment of the monarchy. This was not a golden age of unified Israelite dominion. Rather, it was a fragmented time marked by cycles of apostasy, oppression by surrounding nations, and divine deliverance through charismatic leaders known as judges. Specifically, Samson's story unfolds during a particularly oppressive chapter, the 40-year subjugation under the Philistines. The Philistines, a powerful seafaring people who had settled on the coastal plains southwest of Israel, were technologically superior, possessing iron weaponry and a formidable military structure. They represented a constant, menacing threat, frequently raiding Israelite territories and enforcing their dominance. In the context of national despair and spiritual lukewarmness, the birth of Samson was a beacon of hope, a divine promise delivered to a barren woman, an announcement of a deliverer who would begin to save Israel from the hand of the Philistines. Judges 13-5. His very existence was an act of God's sovereign intervention in a time of national crisis, a testament to his enduring covenant even amidst his people's failings. The foundational text for Samson's life begins in Judges chapter 13, where an angel of the Lord appears to Manoah's wife, announcing the miraculous birth of a son who would be a Nazirite from birth. The Nazirite vow, as outlined in Numbers 6, was a special commitment to God, involving 3 key prohibitions: refraining from wine and other grape products, avoiding contact with dead bodies, and most crucially for Samson, never cutting one's hair. This vow symbolized a life wholly dedicated and set apart for God. For Samson, this was not a personal choice but a divine imposition, a destiny woven into his very being before his first breath. His strength, then, was not merely physical prowess. It was a visible manifestation of the Spirit of the Lord empowering him. Judges 14-6 states, "The Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and although he had nothing in his hand, he tore the lion in two, as one tears a young goat." This phrase, "the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him," is repeatedly used to explain his superhuman feats, slaughtering 30 Philistines, breaking ropes like threads, carrying off the gates of Gaza, and ultimately pulling down the temple. His hair was not the source of his strength, but rather the symbol of his Nazirite vow, the outward sign of his consecration and the channel through which God's power flowed. To violate the vow was to sever that symbolic connection, to break faith with the divine source of his gift. Yet, even with such a sacred calling and extraordinary power, Samson's character remains deeply flawed. He is drawn to Philistine women, a clear contravention of Israelite law and an act that repeatedly brings him into conflict with his own people and God's apparent plan. His self-indulgence, impetuousness, and pursuit of personal vengeance often overshadow his divine mission. He is a paradoxical figure, divinely appointed deliverer, yet deeply entangled in worldly desires. Beyond the dramatic exploits, Samson's story offers profound theological insights into the nature of divine grace, human responsibility, and the perilous consequences of presumption. God's election of Samson was unconditional, his gift of strength unwavering, even as Samson repeatedly tested its boundaries. Yet Samson's reliance on this strength became a dangerous presumption. He assumed God's power would always be present, irrespective of his own obedience or spiritual state. He failed to understand that the power was not his but God's, loaned for a specific purpose and contingent upon his fidelity to the covenant, symbolized by his Nazirite vow. His repeated flirtations with danger, his inability to resist temptation, and his sharing of sacred secrets with Delilah, Judges 16, reveal a fundamental lack of self-control and spiritual discernment. His strength, rather than being coupled with wisdom and piety, became an instrument of personal gratification and often reckless self-interest. This narrative powerfully illustrates that divine gifting, without accompanying spiritual discipline and a heart devoted to God, can lead to catastrophic downfall. The ultimate betrayal was not merely Delilah's, but Samson's betrayal of his own sacred trust, his negligence towards the very source of his extraordinary power. He played with fire, believing his divine protection made him immune, only to find that even the strongest can be undone by unchecked sin and a disregard for sacred boundaries. Samson's story has generated considerable debate among theologians and scholars throughout history. Some view him primarily as a flawed hero, a primitive figure representing the raw, untamed power needed in a chaotic era. They emphasize his ultimate act of self-sacrifice as proof of his redemption and an example of God using imperfect vessels for his purposes. From this perspective, Samson's weaknesses serve to highlight God's enduring grace and ability to work through human frailty. Others interpret his life more as a cautionary tale, a stark warning against spiritual complacency, unchecked passions, and the misuse of divine gifts. They point to his repeated failures to lead Israel, his focus on personal revenge rather than national deliverance, and his ultimate demise as evidence of the destructive consequences of a life lived out of alignment with God's will. This perspective often highlights his story as a profound lesson in the importance of spiritual discipline, obedience, and discerning the true source and purpose of one's talents. Is he a tragic hero who ultimately fulfills his destiny, or a tragic figure whose potential was largely squandered? The tension between these interpretations speaks to the complexity and enduring relevance of his story. Part 3. The conclusion, the eternal echo. Samson's tale, carved from the rough-hewn canvas of ancient Israel, remains one of the most poignant and unsettling in all of Scripture. We have journeyed through the miraculous promise of his birth and the unparalleled strength bestowed upon him. We have witnessed the slow, insidious erosion of his consecration, culminating in the devastating betrayal that cost him his sight, his freedom, and his power. Yet, it is in the dust and despair of the Philistine, in his moment of ultimate humiliation, that a glimmer of profound, tragic redemption emerges. Blinded, shorn, and shackled, Samson cries out to God, not for vengeance, but for strength one last to fulfill his original calling. In that final cataclysmic act of self-sacrifice, pulling down the pillars upon himself and his tormentors, he achieves more in his death than perhaps in his entire life as a judge. It is a redemption steeped in tragedy, a testament to God's unwavering purpose even when his instruments falter. Samson's story leaves us with a lingering echo. How often do we, too, presume upon God's grace, play carelessly with the sacred, and allow our desires to betray our divine calling? What personal pillars might we be unknowingly shaking, and where might we find our own tragic, yet redemptive, strength when all seems lost?